Serra da Estrela, the highest mountain in mainland Portugal, reaching almost 2,000 metres at its summit. With an area of 1,000 square kilometres, this rocky landscape forms the largest national park in the country. An area of high diversity for plants and animals. Here, in the heart of these granite mountains covered by pine forest, there is a very special spring. This is where our journey begins. This place around the spring, thriving under the fresh shadows of pinewood, is called Mondego, which means Little Mondego. At an altitude of 1,500 metres, this is where the Rio Mondego begins its voyage, running fast, forming waterfalls and rapids. It has carved its way into this granite valley for millennia. At the start of spring, the fresh flowing waters of the Mondego make the perfect habitat for a very special bird. The European dipper. This skittish bird has a unique ability among European songbirds. It's the only one capable of diving and swimming. This is a crucial skill to hunt down its favourite prey, insect larvae, shrimp and mollusks. But this male is not just gathering food for himself. He has an extra mouth to feed. At this time of year, during their breeding season, dippers spend more time foraging. Despite making constant trips, the parents struggle to keep the chick satisfied. It seems to be a full-time job. This chick has just left the nest, and it will take him about 10 to 15 days before he can become independent. Until then, he must work on his foraging skills a bit more. At 30 kilometres from the spring, the Rio Mondego has reached a turning point. Here, it leaves the steep granite mountains behind. From now on, the river gets wider, the current loses its grip, and its waters encounter a completely different landscape. The plateau, home to a unique variety of species. Under the warm May sun, basking reptiles like this ocellated lizard are a very common sight in the area. as well as this Iberian emerald lizard, an endemic species that can be found among the foliage. But here, sunbathing has its dangers. This smooth snake is hunting down its next meal. Though very still, this male emerald lizard knows it must be alert. This time, it has escaped. At the end of the plateau, the Rio Mondego meets its largest reservoir at the Dam of Figueira. This monumental construction is the largest barrier on the river, preventing migratory fish from continuing their routes. By this point, Rio Mondego has reached its most threatened section. There are threats from human actions, construction, and intensive agriculture in the riverbanks. Additionally, vast eucalyptus plantations covering hundreds of kilometres of the river are replacing the natural woodland and scrub, a home for many species. Particularly threatened are the amphibians, depending not only on the water quality, but also on the riverbanks and their plant species to survive. Two are especially endangered. This Iberian newt is one of them. Endemic to Portugal and western Spain, this small newt currently faces a serious threat from the pollution of waterways due to the increasing use of pesticides and fertilizers in agriculture. The other species is much more difficult to spot and is the jewel of the Portuguese amphibians. But in order to see it, we must wait for darkness to fall. The golden striped salamander, endemic to the northeast of the Iberian Peninsula. The largest populations are located in Portugal. Though there is still a lot to discover about this species, it's become clear to scientists that its numbers are rapidly decreasing. This salamander has a very unusual shape. Its tail makes up 2/3 of its body size. Without functional lungs, it must breathe entirely through its skin, and having a long tail increases the surface over which oxygen can be absorbed from the water. The long tail also works to repel the salamander, helping it to move in fast water streams, and thereby making it perfectly adapted to this habitat. We are now just 40 kilometres from the coast, where Mondego passes through the largest city along its route to the ocean, Coimbra. In the 12th century, the first king of Portugal, Afonso the Conqueror, chose Coimbra as the capital of his new kingdom. After a reign of more than 40 years, he died in his beloved city by the Mondego, and to this day he rests here. But 9 centuries later, there is a new ruler in Coimbra. The Black Kite. Every year in early spring, hundreds of black kites return from Africa to breed along the banks of the Mondego, making this one of the largest black kite colonies in Europe. The reason for this remarkable concentration of birds is the thriving prey population in the agricultural fields surrounding the river, especially small mammals and amphibians. To cover such an immense area of grassland, the kites rely on the powerful thermals that rise beneath their wings during the hottest hours of the day. The last section of the river, known as Lower Mondego, starts here. These flooded plains stretch along the last 40 kilometres of the river. This land is extremely fertile and is home to one of the largest rice paddies in Europe. As it approaches the sea, the Mondego opens into a large estuary, 10 kilometres long. The island that splits the estuary into two separate canals has become a centre for traditional salt production. The estuary's nutrient-rich waters attract a large concentration of aquatic birds, making this one of the best sites in the country for waders like the black-winged stilt or the dunlin. And the bird's presence is actually of major importance to the traditional method of producing salt. After a long and complex chemical process, the bird's droppings actually improve the quality of salt, a good example of how human activities and wildlife can coexist peacefully. Little terns are now in the middle of their breeding season, and the dried salt ponds offer them the perfect site to incubate their eggs undisturbed. After the eggs hatch, the young chicks are quite difficult to spot among these pale-coloured pebbles, a valuable camouflage against predators. But each time they hear their parents bringing fish, they leave the safety of cover and run begging for food. Right next to the terns, black-winged stilt chicks have also started to take their first steps. However, they leave the hard task of protection to their mothers. In the port city of Figueira da Foz, after flowing for 234 kilometres, finally, the Mondego reaches its destination, the Atlantic Ocean, the end of our long journey. A river acclaimed by poets and songwriters, closely entwined in the history of Portugal. As its waters merge with the sea, a small stream, hidden in the high mountains of Serra da Estrela, continues to ensure the Mondego breathes life into its great variety of habitats and wildlife.